Welcome to Monetizing Innovation. I'm John Holcomb. Innovation isn't just the big idea on the whiteboard. It's the hard decisions, the missed signals, and the leaders who keep moving forward anyway. This show dives into real stories behind breakthroughs in life sciences, healthcare, and tech, how ideas become results, how teams align under pressure, and how strategy turns into execution. If you're building something bold or looking for clarity to lead with confidence, you're in the right place. Press play and let's turn innovation into impact. And today we have a very special guest, Frank Wilde. Thank you, Frank, for joining us today. Frank is really a seasoned digital transformation leader specializing in AI driven enterprise transformation and user experience led innovation. Frank has led large scale transformations for global organizations, including Dell, Apple, and SAP, working with customers such as Verizon, Cisco, PayPal, and the US Army and Navy. His work sits at the intersection of advanced technology, human centered design, and operational execution, helping enterprises turn complexity into a competitive advantage. A recognized thought leader featured in Technology Magazine and Supply Chain Digital, Frank brings a practitioner's perspective on what it really takes to modernize at scale. Again, Frank, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time today.
Well, good stuff, John. Happy to be here.
I really enjoy the collaboration, and I think the discussion will be enlightening here. One of the things that I think is really interesting, you have been in this AI and see that AI as a transformation lever. So when you led some of the transformations at Dell, Apple, and SAP, where have you seen AI deliver that real enterprise value? Where do organizations still struggle to move beyond pilots?
So, John, I mean, a good example would be the time at SAP. So, one of the things that we worked on was really how to help position thought leadership and new content with key customers. So, whether it was in high tech or manufacturing or financial services, really we took a cross industry approach. And I had a team of architects plus data scientists, and we would drop into key customers, primarily working with their CIO or sometimes with, the kind of on the business side, working with their CMO organization, but really looking at ways to be able to leverage their data to drive new outcomes. And part of the opportunity and challenge is that most senior leaders, don't have a clear understanding of the art of the possible. What could you do with AI? What can you do with machine learning? How does RPA fit into the mix? Because they all fit into unique, there's specific niches that both the analytics as well as the data strategy that underpins it, is needed to come to life. So we really helped shape and put, very similar to it, taking a car for a test drive. We really helped customers see what they could do with their data, how we could, for example, rank and rate the likelihood that a customer is going to churn from your service, or help them deploy autonomous forklifts in their manufacturing facility, again, to be able to see the art of the possible. But part of the opportunity and challenge is really even just getting senior leaders to see what is feasible in 3, 6, 9 month type sprints for them to even wrap their arms around, well, how do we then rank prioritize those AI or data strategy type initiatives within our organization?
No, I think that's a great example. And I really like the point that you bring up about the art of the possibility. I find that that is one of the most critical skills, right? That especially leaders need if you're going to drive transformative change. It becomes critical.
Absolutely. And to build on that, one of the things to help bring some of those solutions to life, like we stood up 3 innovation centers. So we would bring in and host senior leaders. So we would bring in a CIO in their team, or we would bring in a CLO and kind of their core leaders, tied into their group, for them to be able to also see and feel what could we do within their environment. And it worked extremely well because in a half day or a day long session, you're able to highlight in like an executive briefing format what you could also do with the organization. So it was a very good use of time. And
No, I think that's fantastic because it really brings in the whole human centric aspect of it, right? AI is a tool to help us, not to replace us. So that I think sometimes with all the news hype, we sometimes lose sight of that, when it's really here to help us. One of the things that, especially I'm sure you've seen, there's many transformations that fail despite the strong technology. And how do you utilize that user experience to change those outcomes in those large scale digital programs?
Well, I would say that, kind of wedded into my DNA is the fact that I started my career as a developer. So having kind of a technical background and really being able to be that, mechanic who can not only build the car, but can also really understand and strategize how do we bring it to market. So, I've got a unique, both technical as well as kind of business outcome or strategy type background. So, being able to marry those two, I would say to your point, is what has helped us really focus in on the human centered aspect, as well as the design thinking aspect of how we drive new initiatives. And a good example, like at Apple, like when I joined Apple, I ran a sales ops organization. So I had the process and tools. So it was a mix of, software development plus process reengineering to be able to look at how do we help Apple grow and evolve moving forward. Because Apple at the time was just moving into the enterprise space. They had done a beautiful job of selling into consumer, but when you think about how do you unlock, value in the enterprise, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 customers, that was all new to them. So one of the key challenges that Apple had was that it was really following a waterfall development methodology to be able to create even internal tools, and it was taking 18 to 24 months to deploy tools at scale across the sales organization, both within Apple as well as with their key partners like IBM,
Mhm.
Cisco, SAP, that type of thing. So one of the first things I did was, I really came in and took a agile approach to be able to say, let's pull in a couple of designers, a couple of software engineers, and a couple of sales leaders. So a very tight knit team, 10 to 12 people. We very quickly, innovated and put in 6 to 8 weeks the core set of sales tools that the team needed rather than waiting 12 and 18 months, sometimes 24 months to do the same thing. So I would say that one of the key aspects is really looking at what your users need and defining the outcome and then having the process marry, or follow through how you achieve that outcome rather than following a legacy process, which often was inherited and, really didn't, fit the need at the time.
Yeah, I think that really touches upon how important it is, right? To focus on, okay, what is the true problem to be solved, right? And then how do we build our solution around that? Could you share a little bit more some of those challenges that you went through? As because I'm sure that's a pretty big, right, change for the organization, like at Apple, to go from the cascade process to then a much faster approach like that.
Well, I would say one of the key things there was the fact that, when you look at even the development life cycle or the development chain that was in place. So really disintermediating, kind of legacy developers. Like we worked quite a bit with offshore development firms. They did a beautiful job, but when you're 2 and 3 steps removed from the user, you often lose really what is it that the user needs? So
Mhm.
one of the key aspects, for example, Apple was following these, 100-page spec or 200-page spec documents to then hand off to a development team that was, on another continent. Well, you often don't have that rapport building, the real understanding of what the user needs. So even just the physical proximity was critical that I saw to be able to understand. And when we shifted to an agile model, we actually unlocked not only faster time to market, but we really looked at and understood the needs of the team where they didn't need a set of bespoke applications. Really, what they needed was a toolbox. And that never would have bubbled to the surface if you kept following kind of a waterfall approach. So it was interesting to see that even that type of discovery was something that was critical by transforming how we developed apps internally.
I imagine that's powerful, right? Because by doing that, you're getting the whole team bought in to then the solution as well, right?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the sales team internally within Apple was, it was great to see their jaws hit the floor when those first few apps rolled off the table, because we had them in weeks. It wasn't months or years. It was a very short period of time. It was exactly what they needed. And within a year, we fueled a $26 billion enterprise business. I mean, not to say that it was only the agile process that fueled that, but it was really a key component that helped us with the tools, with the capabilities that we needed to be able to drive growth moving forward.
That's such a great example. I love that because it definitely shows how important that is, and that kind of leads maybe to the next question that scaling that transformation across ecosystems, especially when I mean, you've worked with both the commercial giants as well as the government organizations, the Army and the Navy. And what changes and what stays the same, especially when you're transforming at such a large scale?
So one of the things that that really helped us, particularly at SAP, was to your point, we took an ecosystem approach to innovation. So not just what type of new software platform or what kind of new AI or data strategy or data management tools could we deploy, but really the question was how do we do this as kind of a ecosystem approach. So we wove in telecoms like AT&T and Verizon. We pulled in kind of chip manufacturers like Nvidia and Intel to be able to look at holistically through the lens of that ecosystem, what kind of joint offerings could we put in place? Because when you look at particularly advanced connectivity like 5G or private 5G, you're in a position to unlock new operating models that even, most organizations don't understand because you're able to rank prioritize the data and the traffic that flows over that network, which is not something that a prior network could handle like 3G or 4G. So you're in a step function change in terms of capability. So we put a G council in place at SAP. So I partnered with the head of the telecom business unit, and we really looked at this through the lens of an industry group to be able to find solutions. So whether it was, working with defense customers, whether it was working with oil and gas, manufacturing, even retailers, because when you think about advanced connectivity, you could put 3D imaging on a store shelf. You could, handle remote surgeries. With the VA, for example, we partnered with them around using private 5G to handle remote surgeries in the field. So the doctors are in the US, the robotic
Mhm.
arms are out in the field, across continents. So there's a number of different solutions and a number of different capabilities that come to life. And we could really only do that by getting kind of the puzzle pieces to align in that industry ecosystem. It's not something that any one player really could solve for. So there's again, an awful lot of opportunity and a lot of challenge in doing that. So, but it was a lot of fun.
No, that's excellent, and it's funny how the same theme carries through, right? Whether you're looking at the ecosystem or within an organization, it really is about bringing the key stakeholders together, right? To make sure, hey, if it doesn't work for the stakeholders, then how are we going to be successful?
Absolutely. And to your point, as we're kind of diving into this, one of the kind of organizing principles was to lead with business outcomes, right?
Mhm.
Really to start every conversation because, whether it was, private 5G or private 6G or, kind of new AI capabilities, each of those technical aspects are excellent and they serve as a foundational element for success. But until you really define what the core business outcome that you want to drive is, that's going to then drive the solutioning, the technical environment, the data strategy, all is then going to flow from there. So as we're discussing both the digital transformation, at an enterprise level, but also for specific outcomes we want to drive, that's really been the organizing principle that I've seen to drive success.
No, I love that because it really is about having that shared vision to be able to then drive common business goals, right? And yeah,
Exactly.
I love that. And that may actually kind of lead into kind of the next question. What are some of the most common leadership mistakes or missteps that you might see when companies attempt these enterprise wide transformations?
Well, there are two that jump to mind. One of which, just like we mentioned, is leading with technology. I really feel that we need to lead with that business outcome.
Mhm.
What is and have a set of metrics and clear success measures for success. Whether it's an ROI, whether it's financial related, whether it's an NPS or a net promoter score. What's the either staff or customer uplift that you're looking to drive? So I feel that the business outcomes need to lead. And then the other key component I would say is similar to a turnaround almost. Most organizations that go through a turnaround or try to do a digital transformation, they often try to do too much. And really, one of the things I learned very clearly at Apple was to be elegantly simple. So how do you focus in on absolutely what needs to be done? All the way down to, even communications at Apple, for example, folks were very succinct with emails or with comms to the point that you really focus in on what's needed and eliminate any of the additional kind of distraction or noise. So the same applies in my mind to a digital transformation. Like, how do you make sure that the team is focused on what needs to be done and really take things off their plate rather than adding to them? as you're looking to move through a change.
Yeah, I really love what you just said too, because that definitely resonates. I know through my own experience and working with different companies, you often see that challenge, right, of the noise that's created because the change is on the way. And by not having that clear, succinct communication, buy-in, the chaos and the noise starts to get louder than the vision, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I love that. I think, especially that clear and succinct is so important, especially in driving these types of change. With everything and just the speed at which some of the technology is changing and improving, as you look at sort of that next wave of enterprise innovation, how do you see things like AI, UX, and digital platforms reshaping the next generation of intelligent enterprises?
So I would say that, one of the key components and kind of the organizing principles is around kind of that data strategy. And it's quite interesting because even my team at SAP, for example, pre-chat GPT, really making a splash, we were very focused to help, key customers primarily the top 50 accounts across SAP, kind of the platinum accounts, with their data strategy. And it was really viewed kind of as a second or third tier level of focus, whether it was on the business side of the house or even within IT. And, with AI, with generative AI, with, predictive analytics, that's really shifted the focus to now where data strategy, in my mind, is a key strategic pillar within the organization. So I would say that it's not all often, surfaced or it's not often receives the most attention, but that's where I see a really a key strategic differentiator are organizations that can understand their data, put a good data management strategy in place, put a good governance model in place, and then align that to the business outcomes they want to drive. And then the AI algorithms, whether it's AI, whether it's ML, whether it's RPA, can then flow from the needs of the business. And it also helps with rank prioritization because we would love to be able to do everything at once. But without that solid data platform, similar to building a house, if you don't have that strong foundation, that house, 5, 10, 15 years down the road is not going to be able to weather those storms or handle, kind of just normal wear and tear. So we need to be in a position, I would say, to really put a data strategy and a data fabric in place that allows for follow-on AI, whether it's predictive, whether it's agentic, whether it's generative, and then be able to look at how do we help support the growth of the business moving.
I think that's so important, like you said, because sometimes that data strategy, especially in the midst of everything that's going on, I don't know that it's recognized as how critical it can be. We had an example. I was talking to a gentleman just recently the other day that was trying to look at how to apply AI, especially in the medical space, and both at the hospital level as well as in the drug development level. And, I think you highlighted, one of the key concerns, right, is like if you have to develop the data strategy first, and, that led to some of the work they were doing with digital twins and, trying to be able to, well, we don't need all the information, we need the right information. Could you share some examples like that? Especially, I mean, you worked with the military, you worked with, some of these, large organizations. Can you give us some examples that you've had to work through to help them develop the data strategy?
So a good example would be the work with the VA. So the VA
Mhm.
had just stood up their Orlando, hospital, and facility. It's one of the largest facilities in the VA network. It's essentially the hub for their IT organization. So they were wrestling with how do they better provide care to veterans that are, in an outpatient facility as well as in a given hospital within the VA system. And one of the challenges they had was just logistically, getting doctors or nurses or PAs to be able to have to log in every time they met with a patient into a PC that was in the room with them, for example, to show patient records or imaging results, that type of thing. So we really helped them think very differently about how they could operate because using advanced connectivity, so whether it's private 5G, whether it's private 6G, we could stream those MRI scans, for example, to the doctor's phone, and they never needed to log in. That data didn't need to reside on the device. So you didn't have a concern around confidentiality or any kind of HIPAA compliance issues because the data is actually being streamed so you can view it in real time, but it's actually not resident on the device. It's not stored on that hard drive or stored in the memory on that phone or iPad. So it really gave them a step function change because now the doctors can see more patients in a given day. They can see another 10 or 15% more. They have an easier time. They don't have to be logging in, 20 times a day into given, PCs that are in that room. So it fundamentally changed the patient as well as the doctor experience. So those are the types of innovations I enjoy driving because it really has a measurable impact to operations. You now can see more patients, or the doctor can spend more time with the patient to really dive into their needs. So it really changed, kind of that dynamic. So that's the type of work I love to do. And it's really based on the data strategy. Like if you were not in a position to be able to stream that data, to be able to think through kind of out of the box how they could operate, day to day, they wouldn't be in that position to be able to help them. So that's the kind of thing I enjoy doing.
I love that example too, because that's such a great example of innovation, right? Where you're thinking outside the box. That there's still you can still solve the same need, but by thinking through it a different way, right? It's wonderful, and it does come back to that data strategy, so that's fantastic. Yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation. This is just fantastic. Are there any things that you would like to share, but especially as we have, some of these future innovators, entrepreneurs that are starting out? Any key lessons that you would really, help pass along?
Well, two things jump to mind. One of which I've taken a more active role in mentoring.
Mm.
So, and I've really found, helping folks that are earlier, even mid stage in their career, helping them with, career development, thinking about key milestones to go after, what tools and techniques, what kind of mentors do they need? Because one of the things I, for example, would have loved to have done earlier on had I really saw, how this could help was to lean on a mentor network, not just one, but, get two or three mentors in your life as you're working through different life stages. So I would say that that's something that I very much enjoyed because it's fulfilling to help folks that are early in their career, whether they're landing their first job, whether they're looking to make a career change. And so that's one thing that I'd recommend is that folks take an active role wherever they are in their career to kind of reach back and help others. And then two, along those lines, I've just found quite a bit of value, helping folks that are, particularly youth. Like I work with the First Tee, and the First Tee teaches life skills using golf. So in the Bay Area, for example, I was on the board for a number of years, and we worked with about 10,000 kids in the Bay Area, and we helped them, from 7 to age 17. And we had 5 different stages of development. So essentially every 2 years, we would help them with life skills, whether it's communication, trust, team building. And as they approach high school, we help them with career development. What is the right path for you, whether it's going after college, whether it's a trade school, whether it's going to work right away. So in a similar vein to the mentoring, I found that that was extremely helpful to help folks think through that at an early age, what could they do in their career? What is open to them moving forward? So again, I would recommend that folks take a look at whether it's nonprofits, sitting on a board, volunteering. It just really, really helps, particularly youth, think very differently and have kind of a role model and set of aspirations that they can themselves, tackle together. So those are probably the two pieces of insight that I would just provide.
I think that's huge, and I really appreciate that. I think it just demonstrates the importance of a servant leader, right? Really being able to help others grow. So truly appreciate that. And Frank, I have to admit, like it's inspiring to hear you say that too, because not only are you helping our future generations, you're willing to collaborate on podcasts like this so that we can also help fellow innovators. Truly appreciate that. And thank you for your service as well for the armed forces. I know with your time in the Navy, I think that's just fantastic, and it's amazing to see you share your knowledge with so many folks. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, John, for having me. This is excellent. Always happy to talk about ways to help drive innovation. It's excellent.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Frank, and we'll look forward to continuing these dialogues. Hopefully, we can have you back here for a future episode as well.
Well, it sounds great. Thanks, John. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.